Last year was a tumultuous time for the crypto industry, with several large firms imploding, including Celsius, Three Arrows Capital, Voyager, and FTX. Despite the market downturn, illicit transaction volume increased for the second straight year, hitting an all-time high of nearly $21 billion, according to Chainalysis. And joining us now with more is Chainalysis Director of Research, Tim Grauer. Kim, what are some of the key findings and trends in your latest report in terms of illicit crypto activities?
First of all, thanks for having me here. I'm always excited to chat with you guys. My biggest takeaway from the crypto crime report this year was that, as you said, crypto crime was at an all-time high. It hit over $20 billion in total value received by illicit wallets. But each kind of subtype of criminal activity, there's not just crypto crime, there's scamming, there's ransomware, there's darknet marketplaces. They all behaved by very different trends. So most of the types of illicit activity that we track were actually trending down over the year, but there were two categories that really stood out in terms of their growth, and that's sanctioned activity, and then hacking continued to grow as well.
So on that point about sanctioned activity, obviously we have a war going on right now. It's the history of the war, the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. How much of that is in that sanctioned bucket, and how much has that basically boosted the numbers of illicit activity in crypto?
It's a really good question. And what we saw from OFAC last year was that they were starting to designate new types of things, so services. And in the past, Chainalysis has identified that most of the ransomware and darknet market activity is actually exiting through a smaller number of specific money laundering services than you might otherwise think. And many of those are Russia-based. I'm thinking Garantex, Suex, Chadex. BitsLotto recently had an action. And so the vast majority of the sanctioned activity, the majority of the sanctioned activity in 2022 was from funds flowing to Garantex or other services like that after the designations occurred. Now, another substantial part were designations related to North Korea. However, still the biggest amount comes from funds flowing to Russia-based off-ramps, which we've been profiling and we actually know even where they're based within Russia. So we profiled them not only in Moscow city area, but also many of them are registered in one specific building called Federation Tower East in Moscow City.
Yeah, I understand there's good coffee to have down in the basement there. But aside from that, I mean, do we know, have you gone back retroactively and looked at flow of funds into these entities? And also, you mentioned North Korea. Has North Koreans' market share, if you will, I don't want to say market share, but rather their total funds stayed the same, gone down? Obviously, their market share of illicit activity, if you will, has probably gone down if Russia's taking a larger share of this. So I guess the first question, going backwards in time, has that increased significantly going to Russia? Second of all, have funds increased or decreased going to North Korea?
When we look at just Russia funds, I think it's crucial to acknowledge that we're looking at funds in that category. We're looking at funds that are received by services after the designation occurred. And because of the fact that the designation is a service rather than, in the past, we've seen the designations be maybe an address related to a fentanyl distributor, because it's an actual service, the total value associated with going to services like Garantex after the designation is astronomically high. And it is higher than the amount of funds going to those North Korea sanctioned addresses. And we continue to monitor these. So what is the impact of sanctions in general? And it really has a differential impact depending on what type of entity was sanctioned. So for example, sometimes if you designate a service where people don't particularly care about US sanctions, it will continue to to generate income in a different jurisdiction. Now, going to your second question, even though we have all of this stuff happening with Russia and post-designation sanctioned funds flowing to services based in Russia, North Korea, it doesn't matter to the trends in North Korea. We saw an exponential increase in the amount of funds hacked by North Korean hacking organizations, $1.6 billion in 2022 alone, and that was up significantly from the previous year. This is because there have been major high-value hacks that we can definitively attribute to North Korea in 2022, and that has also continued to grow. And we can see that in the hacking numbers of our report, which was one of the only two types of crime that saw a rise from 2022.
Yeah, I think we have a chart on that. So 2022 was the biggest year ever for crypto hacking, with actually 3.8 billion stolen primarily from DeFi protocols and by North Korea, as you mentioned, North Korea-linked attackers. So maybe you can give us the down low on that in terms of, we're in a bear market. Crypto hacking higher well, is at least one part of the crypto industry that's thriving.
Yeah, that is definitely something to consider. Is these numbers are so high and we're in a bear market, which means that's significant. But certain types of crime are really connected to the bear market. Things like scamming. Scamming tends to move in tandem with overall activity, and so do some other types of criminal activity as well. But hacking is what we would call kind of price agnostic. Hackers, on the margins, they will be impacted by what's happening with the prices, but by and large, these are organizations that are set up, they're running like businesses, they're hacking all the time, and whether or not they find a vulnerability in your smart contract doesn't have anything to do with the price. And the reason why things continue to grow is because of the targets of these hacks. Many of the targets of these hacks are DeFi protocols that have vulnerabilities. And as we saw, and this is actually a point that I think is kind of lost in our assessment of what happened last year. One of the reasons why we saw so much happening in the industry around, the FTX and the Celsius is because there were many of the DeFi protocols had been hacked, which kind of weakened balance sheets already. And so we see that, hacking was growing so much because of these DeFi problems that we've been identifying now for 2 years.
Is there any way of recovering those funds? They could be tracked, no?
Absolutely. That's one of the more kind of silver linings of this whole thing is the second there's a major hackers, the problem begins for hackers because now they have millions, some hundreds of millions sometimes of funds that they have to successfully move to off-ramps. And with companies like Chainalysis, we're live tracing these funds every time there's a transaction. We're going to know about it. Every time they try and move the funds, we're going to know about it. And so we can trace those funds to services. And then once they hit a service, you can kind of work with the exchange to freeze those funds and then get those recouped by law enforcement and eventually make the victim whole again. It's actually a really important business model for Chainalysis is tracing these funds to off-ramps so that we can freeze the funds and make the victims whole again.
Now, we only have a couple of minutes left because I have to click on this email that says that something is wrong with my account, and I'm just going to go fix it. But before we do that, looking forward, do we have a sense of whether or not this is getting better or worse compared to 2022, 2023? Are there any improvements, or is it just more bleak news in terms of the amount of hacking and sanctioned activity?
Last year I kind of made the prediction that the industry has to improve if it's going to grow, in its legitimate use cases. We can't continue to have this rate of hacking because it just really undermines trust in the ecosystem. And actually, I'm starting to see some positive changes. We're seeing, and it's actually in the form of industry advancements. I'm seeing companies pop up that are really targeting solutions here and are being adopted by companies to help with prioritizing cybersecurity, building the right cyber teams to manage billions of dollars of customer funds. And I think we're seeing hard lessons are starting to get learned, but crucially, we've got industry solutions that are there to assist people who are trying to build protocols that manage more money than maybe they would have originally expected.